Joining us now on the set at the Canadian Science Policy Project in Calgary at the TELUS Spark Science Centre is David Bailey. You're the CEO of Genome Alberta. Why did you decide to come to this conference?
Well, I've attended them in previous years, and I really enjoyed them. And when it was coming to Calgary, I really liked the focus they put on this one for, food, farming, and fuel. So to me, that's really fit well with what we have to deal with here in Alberta. In addition to that, Alberta does influence a lot of national policy, and I wanted to be part of that.
Do you see that? I mean, you talk about Alberta influencing national policy. Is that changing? Because we keep talking about the power shift heading from the east to the west. Is this part of that?
I really think it is. Alberta has always been very inclusive about including the federal government and how we make decisions here. And now I just see that there's a receptivity, especially with our new premier, of how do we develop national policy that Alberta has a voice in it. And she's taken a leadership role, and I just welcome that. I think we're fortunate to live here right now.
One of the people we had a chance to speak to, because one of the things that seems to be lacking in our country is science policy. And there's nothing definitive from what I understand. I guess all-encompassing, because there's so many different areas that we're looking at. But they said one of the barriers to that is the fact that the provinces tend not to work together, tend not to work with the federal government. And what is your take on that?
Oh, I think those barriers or boundaries are breaking down. I think in these areas of food and agriculture, these cross provincial boundaries, fuel, environment, water, they all cross provincial boundaries. So you may live in Saskatchewan and we live in Alberta. Water's important to both of us. Food's important to both of us. Same as Ontario, same in Nova Scotia or PEI or BC. Slightly different ways of how we generate some of that maybe, and some policies around subsidies and all that kind of stuff. Bottom line is, these are important to our Canadians, whether you're Saskatchewan or Native or Alberta or BC.
You're part of a group that was discussing innovation in agriculture and the role of policy. What is the role of policy when it comes to those sorts of things?
Well, you should have been in the workshop we just hosted here. So what is the role of innovation? I think for going forward in the future, how is agriculture going to be innovative to produce the food that's going to be needed for a rapidly growing world population, roughly 9 billion people by 2050, and how can Canada be part of that? So that was the whole gist of the discussion, whether it's in animal agriculture, crop, horticulture, what do we need to do to develop policies that aren't barriers but actually facilitate production of food and meaningful quality food with a reasonable level of return for the producers and all the way through that food chain.
I mean, we're talking agriculture. It's not an industry that is new.
Correct. And
certainly not new to Alberta as well. Is it an industry, because I imagine there's a lot of set ways of doing things and that have worked for decades and generations. Is there a lot of innovation in this area?
Oh, I think so, and I think there is a need now by groups are pulling together and saying, well, what you're asking this research organization to do, we also need that. Well, we're in canola and you're in flax, but we both need disease resistance in our crops. So how can we work collectively on this? Or GMO is a big topic, genetically modified plants. What do we do with that? What policy, what is Canada's position on that? What is the global position on that? We are producing foods with, we could maybe make that plant more disease resistant if we inserted a particular sequence of DNA into it, but is there acceptance to that? And so what's the point of producing it if you don't have the world acceptance for it, or market's acceptance? But there is a changing, that's been a major topic for 20 years and really held back, I'd say, innovation into these molecular areas because there was no market pull for it. Now it looks like, how do you feed people? One of the ways has to be through GMOs.
Well, and from what I understand, it makes up a huge portion of our food already.
Yes, it does.
That we're just not aware of.
That's correct.
Do you think it's something that we should be, should policy encompass that, letting people know where their food is coming from, or does it just get to be too much? How much can you put on a label?
That's one aspect of it, and the other is just good, solid education about what does GMOs really mean, and because there's different sides to this, and not to be a balanced approach to looking at it is not good, you know. So you hear a lot of demonstrations and demonstrators out there saying, you know, this is something that you really need to be worried about, frankenfood, all those kind of things. Well, you really need to get a balanced approach to that. What does that actually mean? Ultimately, you're consuming protein, and is that protein really, you know, any different than other sources of protein for you? So, you know, I think that just policy will help you actually give the mandate to say to the public, yes, we want to talk about this openly and freely, and this is what it really means.
I mean, you talk about the one side talking about frankenfood and they're against it, but obviously then you've got the chemical companies and the seed companies that are on the other side that are saying, what are you worried about? Trust us, everything is just fine.
Exactly.
So you're looking for a balance. And
a more neutral body that could come in and assess things and say, listen, we've looked at the facts, we've actually done the experiments independently, we know that this is harmful or not harmful. Mm-hmm. In most cases, I think the results would say, protein at the end of the day, your body digests it and takes advantage of it best it can, like any other source of protein.
So the average person may struggle to come up and find that unbiased opinion, but it should be getting to our government leaders.
Yes.
And we're going to trust them now to make, you know, an informed decision.
That's the key word there, informed.
How do you get them to act on something when it seems like politicians are often slow to react on things and are obviously, if we don't have a science policy in Canada, how do we expect them to now do something about it?
Well, conferences like this actually bring some of those politicians we heard. A number of them were in the audience today, and Preston Manning is the guest speaker tonight. These are people that do connect with politicians and are trusted and are able to convey the message. They're good communicators and convey this is why we need good policy in this country on agriculture and energy and environment, all these topics, you know, and that raise the level of awareness among politicians.
What do you think a lack of policy has meant?
Well, in some cases...
but there's obviously regulations in place, because when you talk about policy, it makes you wonder, is anybody watching what's going on? And obviously that's happening in a number of industries. But what does a lack of a firm policy, what does it mean?
It could mean a lack of access to markets, because like you just said, you know, regulatory things come into effect. Canada can be shut out of other markets because of, you know, not having a formal policy and a regulatory system that actually addresses a particular issue. So it could hurt us in terms of market access. The other ways that could actually help us by having that policy in place and promoting it so that we actually are leading the world and saying, we've actually looked at this topic, this is an important thing for us to be doing, we're doing it, and probably provide us more or greater access to world markets for our food, and we are an export country.
Right. You've been to this conference, you've said other times in the past. What do you hope to get out of it this time?
Well, I really benefit from this morning's panel. I mean, they had a great group of speakers up there talking about the impact that innovation could play in helping move agriculture, food, fuel forward for Canada. And I think we just need to be hearing more of that and seeing how it affects us, you know, in my own organization, you know, how we collaborate with others. So we work across the country in this area. It's a collaborative effort, and it just raises the level of information among all the participants by being here.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for joining us, David.
No, thank you. I enjoyed it.
We've been chatting with David Bailey, the CEO of Genome Alberta.